The room was way too quiet for a boardroom packed with executives. No one was talking, no one was even breathing. You could hear the tension humming through the polished floor. I stepped in, heels clicking like a countdown clock. The man at the head of the table, my father, froze mid-sentence. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the edge of the table. And my sister, Heather. She just blinked. Twice. Like her brain refused to register what her eyes were seeing. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked to the end of the table, sat down, opened the sleek black folder with the Sentinel Atlas logo, and looked up. "Let's begin," I said. That's when Heather found her voice. "Wait, you're the CEO?" I looked at her the same way she used to look at me when I showed up to family dinners in my army-issued windbreaker. Like I wasn't dressed properly for the occasion. "You recognize me now?" I asked. "Nice." Her husband turned, confused. "You two know each other?" I smiled, just a little. "More than you think." Yeah. That was the moment. 15 years of silence, 15 years of family photo albums I didn't appear in, phone calls I wasn't part of, holidays I wasn't invited to, and now, suddenly, I was very relevant. They were sitting in my building, trying to finalize a deal to save the company my sister ran into the ground. And I was the one holding the pen that could fix it all. Or not. Before I walked into that room, Heather still thought I was some ex-military dropout living in a studio apartment somewhere in Kansas, probably working as a security guard at a mall. To be fair, that's what she told everyone for years. She made sure my name stayed low. My job wasn't real. My choices weren't valid. I wasn't the right kind of successful. Heather was always the face. She knew how to show up, dress up, speak up. I was the kid who took ROTC in high school and skipped the family business internship for basic training. Our parents hated that. So did she. The last time I was mentioned in the Whitaker family group chat, it was a forwarded photo of me in uniform with the caption, "Rachel playing G.I. Jane again." I didn't respond. I didn't say anything, I just did the work. So yeah, 15 years later, sitting at the head of that table in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Heather's last quarterly PR budget, I wasn't interested in playing nice. The best part? I didn't need to say much. My name was on the wall behind me. Sentinel Atlas Group. My title was in the investor documents spread across the table. My presence was the twist in their story they never saw coming. And here's what I want you to think about. How many people wrote you off? How many looked at your path and said, "That's not how success looks"? If you've got names in mind, I suggest you remember them. Not for revenge, but for motivation. Because if you stay quiet long enough, build smart enough, and learn how to move when no one's watching, you won't need to shout. You'll just walk in and take your seat. And the room will go silent. If that hit home, leave a comment. I want to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe, this one's just getting warmed up. Heather cleared her throat like she was about to say something meaningful. I raised a hand. "Let's stick to business," I said. "The documents are in front of you. Feel free to read them out loud unless you're worried your investors might not like the new terms." The legal rep to her right shifted uncomfortably. My father leaned in, finally piecing it together. His voice cracked as he said my name, first time in years. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the woman who once laughed when I told her I wanted to build something of my own. She's not laughing now. Heather didn't even wait until I left the room that day. I was 14. She was 16 and already acting like she owned the family name. We'd just gotten back from a school awards ceremony. I had won a regional science fair for a project using heat signatures and drone mapping, nothing fancy, just something I put together in our garage using old parts. Heather? She had hosted a charity fashion show at her prep school. Guess which one our parents brought up over dinner? "She's a natural leader," Mom said, gesturing toward Heather like she was the reincarnation of Jackie Kennedy. "It's no surprise, she knows how to carry herself." Dad nodded with that proud smirk he always reserved for her. People follow polish, not wires and solder. I sat there, poking my green beans. I had just come home with a plaque and a $3,000 scholarship offer. Heather got a standing ovation for pairing pastels and walking on stage in borrowed heels. No one asked what my project was about. No one cared. Later that night, I overheard Heather in the hallway talking to one of her friends on speakerphone. She's not even cute, smart. She's weird, smart. Like Army or something, you know the type. She didn't know I was behind the door. Or maybe she did. With Heather, you could never be sure. That's when it started the quiet campaign to box me out, not through screaming or slamming doors. No, she was too PR trained for that. It was smiles with no warmth, compliments with sharp edges, subtle little stabs that never left bruises but always cut deep. By sophomore year, the rest of the family was falling in line. I wanted to apply for the JROTC program. Mom called it unladylike. Dad said it was a phase. Heather? She just smiled and said, "She's gonna enlist and disappear. Watch." I didn't disappear. I graduated a year early. I got my acceptance into a top-tier military academy. I told them at dinner, over roasted chicken and wine they let Heather sip like an adult. I passed the letter across the table. They glanced at it. Barely. "Rachel," Mom said, "you really don't want to do this. It's not who you are." "You mean it's not who you want me to be?" I said. They looked at Heather. She shrugged. "Let her go be the tough girl. She'll be back when she realizes boots don't get you very far." Dad laughed. That quiet, dismissive laugh of his that always meant, "This conversation is over." I left the house that night without packing. Just grabbed my wallet and rode my bike to Celeste's, the only person who didn't look at me like I was broken for wanting something different. She made tea and gave me a blanket and didn't ask questions. Just said, "They'll regret it, but you won't." From that day on, I became a side note in my own family. My name stopped showing up in their holiday newsletters. My photo disappeared from the living room wall. My cousin once told me Heather claimed I had some personal crisis and moved away. As if the army was rehab. What Heather did best was make my absence convenient. Even when I called on Thanksgiving, Mom would hand the phone to Heather. Heather would keep her tone sweet and say things like, "Oh wow, are you still doing the whole military thing?" Then she'd laugh like it was cute. She was already working at Whitaker and Klein by then. Fresh out of college, already making contacts in DC, going to rooftop galas and dressing like a political campaign ad. She loved reminding me that I wore the same boots every day, while she rotated designer pumps like real professionals do. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I let her talk. She was good at talking. But I was learning something she didn't know. While she spent her 20s making herself visible, I spent mine becoming essential. I learned how systems work, how data flows, how people make decisions under pressure. I didn't need a brand. I needed leverage. Heather never realized the difference. There's a reason she didn't recognize me in that boardroom. She was never looking for me to succeed. She was waiting for me to fail. And when I didn't, she just edited me out. So, when I stood in front of that table, years later, wearing that suit and holding her company's future in my hands, I wasn't angry. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even trying to make a point. I was simply claiming what I'd earned. She built a name. I built something no one could take away. I signed the enlistment paperwork 3 days after my high school graduation. No party, no dinner, no cake. Just me, a cheap duffel bag from Target, and a bus ticket out of Boston. It was June, humid, and my uniform was 3 sizes too big. The base smelled like hot pavement, chlorine, and fear. The kind that sat in your chest and didn't move. I was surrounded by people louder than me, taller than me, meaner than me. Nobody cared where you came from. No one cared what your GPA was or how many AP classes you took. In basic training, all that mattered was if you could shut up, show up, and run without dying. I was 18, 5'4", and weighed about as much as the backpack I carried. The first thing someone said to me was, "You're gonna last a week." I lasted a lot longer than that. I wasn't the strongest, and I damn sure wasn't the fastest, but I learned how to adapt. I listened. I noticed things others didn't. Like who panicked under pressure. Who didn't tighten their bootlaces. Who barked loudest when they were scared. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just kept moving. One night during week 5, a girl in our unit got hurt during a night drill. Heat stroke. She dropped flat on the gravel. While everyone froze or screamed for a medic, I picked her up and got her under the shade. Checked her pulse. Loosened her vest. The instructor didn't say a word. But the next morning, he called me out in front of everyone. "Whitaker," he said, "you're not loud, but you're damn useful." That's when things started to shift. They moved me into a data analysis track. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I said yes. A week later, I was sitting in front of a dusty monitor learning how to sort heat signatures and track drone footage. You'd be amazed how much power sits behind a quiet keyboard in a quiet tent in the middle of a desert. It turns out I was good at pattern sheet trails, movement frequencies, satellite lag times. I could find blind spots in recon scans that other people missed. I could predict which routes were safest based on nothing but data and instinct. Eventually, they noticed. I started getting pulled into briefing rooms. Quiet ones, with locked doors and no name tags. Meanwhile, Heather was on Instagram sipping cocktails in Georgetown, tagging herself at power lunches and writing captions about manifesting success. Mom forwarded me her posts sometimes, as if I needed a reminder of what I wasn't. I didn't respond. I was busy creating predictive threat models while half our team was asleep. I was writing code to keep convoys alive. No one was clapping, no one was filming, but people made it home. And that counted more than any press release. What most people don't get is that military work isn't all explosions and glory. It's a lot of waiting, planning, watching patterns, thinking 4 steps ahead so you don't have to bury anyone next week. I learned how to be invisible, effective, and deadly accurate. I learned how to lead without needing to be seen. Funny thing is, that skill translates really well to the private sector. By my mid-20s, I had rotated through 2 bases, 1 overseas deployment, and a 6-month joint task force program where we partnered with civilian cybersecurity teams. That's when the idea for Sentinel Atlas started brewing. Quietly, like everything else in my life. I kept my head down, saved every paycheck, took online classes at night, got into a part-time MBA program with a military scholarship. Every class I took strategy, operations, crisis management connected back to what I already knew from the field. I just gave it boardroom language. No one in my family knew. Not because I was hiding it, but because they never asked. I got the same group text every year on my birthday. A thumbs up emoji and maybe a cake gif. No phone call. No. How's work? No. Are you okay? Heather once joked in a comment thread that I was probably off-grid decoding spy satellites. People laughed. She always knew how to get the right kind of attention. But I didn't need attention. I needed results. And every small winery contract, every new client, every hire I stacked like ammo. No one saw me coming because no one bothered to look. The first time I heard what Heather had been telling people about me, I was sitting in a makeshift server room on a NATO base in Sicily, cleaning sand out of a laptop fan with a toothbrush. A former classmate messaged me on LinkedIn, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school debate team. She said, "Hey, random question. Are you actually a security guard now? I bumped into your sister at a fundraiser and she said you were working part-time at a military base." She made it sound kinda sad. I didn't reply. I just stared at the message and smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Heather. She always had a gift for repackaging things to fit her version of reality. According to her, if you weren't photogenic and profitable, you didn't count. I could have been rewriting the National Cybersecurity Playbook, and she'd still describe me as someone doing admin stuff in camo. I didn't push back. I'd learned that correcting Heather was a waste of time. She didn't need facts, she needed followers. At that point, her face was starting to show up in articles with words like visionary and next-gen leadership. Whitaker and Klein had just landed a rebranding contract with a major pharmaceutical giant, and Heather made sure everyone knew she led the pitch. Mom texted me a screenshot of the article. "She's on fire," she wrote. No mention of me. No. How are things on your end? Just a headline about Heather and a string of exclamation points. Back at the base, I just helped shut down a cross-border data breach attempt using a protocol I helped design. We prevented a blackout in 3 zones and uncovered a contractor leaking files. But sure, let's talk about Heather's award for brand storytelling excellence. That was the running theme. No matter what I did, I was still the other one. The one who didn't smile in family photos. The one who didn't wear heels. The one who kept choosing the hard way. Heather used my name like a punchline when it suited her and ignored it when it didn't. A guy she once dated told me, years later, that Heather referred to me as the family dropout who went full military and disappeared. He said she laughed when she said it. The kind of laugh you only use when you're trying to sound above someone. She wasn't afraid I'd fail. She was afraid I'd succeed in a way she couldn't spin. What she never saw coming was how every time she downplayed me, she made it easier for me to build without interference. She made sure no one looked too closely. Which meant no one asked questions when I incorporated Sentinel Atlas under my middle name. No one blinked when my early contracts were processed quietly, without big press releases or grand openings. While she was throwing launch parties, I was setting up encrypted communication systems. While she posed for industry magazines, I was mapping threat networks across digital infrastructure. I didn't need praise. I needed funding, discipline, and room to operate. And because of her, I got it. Ironically, Heather made me invisible in all the right places. Even when family events rolled around, and by events, I mean the ones I wasn't invited to, I kept quiet. Sometimes I'd get a forwarded invite from a second cousin, not realizing I'd been accidentally left off the list. Other times, nothing came at all. I only found out about Dad's retirement dinner when I saw it posted on Heather's public Facebook. Big smiles. Toasts. All of them, dressed to impress. I wasn't even in the photo collage slideshow. Celeste called me that night. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I don't take it personally." She snorted. "You should. They're doing it on purpose." She was right, but I didn't need to say it out loud. I'd already accepted my role in their ecosystem. The cautionary tale, the black sheep, the sister who chose Boots over boardrooms, except, of course, they had no idea which boardroom I was actually in. And I wasn't going to explain it. They'd find out soon enough, just not from me. I didn't set out to be the person who sat behind glass and made calls that changed operations. It just happened because I kept showing up when things got complicated. The turning point was in Jordan 6 months into a classified support mission. We were rotating shifts in the intel tent, pulling drone footage and parsing comms from intercepted chatter. I wasn't supposed to be leading anything. I was just there to help keep things organized. Then the systems glitched. 3 of our feeds went dark mid-scan. The terrain map scrambled. The backup server locked up. People panicked. The captain in charge was halfway through blaming a satellite issue when I stepped up and ran a manual override from the server closet. Reset the relay, rerouted the comms, and stabilized the feed. We re-established full visual just minutes before a routine convoy crossed into what would have been a hot zone. No one died that day. But someone would have if I hadn't ignored the chain of command and just moved. They didn't say thank you. That's not how things work out there. But the next week, I was pulled into a closed-door session with a NATO systems advisor who told me quietly, "You've got a feel for gaps. That's rare." They started asking me for input. Not officially, but the pattern was clear. When ops weren't adding up, they brought me in not because I'd rank, but because I saw things others didn't. That became my role. The gap reader, the silent fixer, the analyst who didn't ask for credit but somehow knew where the risk was hiding. Back in the States, I got assigned to a temporary joint task force partnering with civilian cybersecurity contractors. That's when I really saw the disconnect. Corporate firms charged millions to do half of what we did with duct tape and field tools. They had the software, we had the urgency. They threw buzzwords around. Proactive protection. Real-time threat evaluation. But when you asked them what to do if a comm node went dark during a breach, they froze. I started taking notes. That task force ended after 9 months. I left with a list of flaws in their systems and a dozen ideas for how to do it better. I also left with 2 important contact zone ex-military who went private, and 1 civilian who respected how I thought. Both said the same thing. If you build it, we'll follow. That was the unofficial birth of Sentinel Atlas. I didn't launch right away. I knew better than to throw a logo on a website and start pitching. I spent 2 years consulting under the radar. Took projects no one else wanted. Cleaned up digital messes in high-pressure industries. I made connections the quiet way solving problems, staying out of headlines, and keeping NDAs tighter than federal clearance protocols. Every win turned into leverage. By the time I registered Sentinel Atlas as an actual firm, I already had 6 clients and 2 former task force operators ready to jump on board. We didn't start loud. We didn't have a PR team. We had systems, discipline, and a mission. Protect companies the same way we'd protect units on deployment. People assumed I was just the operations lead. Even our first few clients didn't realize I was the founder. I liked it that way. It kept egos in check. Behind closed doors, I was designing our structure like a mission unit, agile teams, layered response plans, redundancy built into every contract. I didn't care about buzz. I cared about not getting blindsided. We got our first major break when a logistics company in Nevada hired us to secure their trade routes after a ransomware attack. We neutralized the breach in 48 hours and rewrote their security protocols from the ground up. Word spread, but only in the right circles, the ones who didn't want their names in the papers. And still, my family had no clue. At Thanksgiving that year, I called in to say hello. Mom passed the phone to Heather, who told me, "We were just saying how quiet you've been, still doing your top secret soldier stuff." I said, something like that. She laughed and changed the subject to a gala she was planning. No one asked where I lived. No one asked what I did. They still thought I was playing soldier. They didn't know I had 3 former federal agents working under me, 2 Fortune 500 contracts pending, and a federal clearance level higher than half the people at Heather's client events. And that suited me just fine. I didn't wake up one morning and decide I wanted to be a CEO. I just got tired of watching mediocre men in suits fumble through problems I could solve in half the time with half the budget. After my last long-term defense contract wrapped, I didn't re-up. I could have stayed in the system, racked up a pension, maybe taken a desk job with a clearance title that sounded important but really meant I'd be buried under bureaucracy until retirement. But the more I sat in those conference calls with strategic consultants and risk mitigation experts, the more I realized I wasn't built to sit still and wait for someone else to screw up so I could quietly fix it. So I left. No big exit speech. No LinkedIn announcement with a flag in the background. Just a clean break and a quiet apartment in Charlotte where I started building what I knew would eventually outgrow every room I put it in. I cashed out my savings. Not much by corporate standards, but enough to get an LLC registered, hire one guy I trusted from my last team, and rent a modest office with unreliable heating. We didn't have a receptionist. We didn't even have signage. But we had encrypted servers and a 3-tier incident response model that could make most mid-sized cybersecurity teams look like amateurs. Our first client was a manufacturing firm getting extorted over a potential data leak involving union records. We locked it down in 72 hours. They offered a bonus if we kept it out of the press. I declined the bonus. I told them to refer us quietly to 3 more people who didn't want their problems turned into headlines. That became our business model. Fix things, stay invisible, let results build reputation. I knew we couldn't compete with the loud firms on branding. We didn't have the glossy brochures, the fake diversity panels, or the beachfront leadership retreats. What we had were people who'd worked under fire, who didn't flinch at red alerts, and who knew that real success came from staying calm when everyone else panicked. By year 2, Sentinel Atlas was profitable. Not viral. Not famous. But steady. We added 2 more operators, a lawyer, and someone to manage logistics. I handled strategy, operations, and client relationships personally. No middlemen, no fluff. And still, my family thought I was between jobs. One time, at a rare family Zoom for Dad's birthday, Heather asked dead serious if I needed help updating my resume. She said it like a joke, but it wasn't. That's how she saw me. Still, a sister with potential. Not someone who'd already surpassed her in everything but press mentions. I didn't argue. I told her I appreciated the offer and muted myself. Then I reviewed 2 pending defense contracts while she talked about rebranding some senator's wife's skincare line. Around that time, we picked up our first international clientele logistics network that needed to secure supply routes across Central Europe. The job was messy, politically sensitive, and had to be done without leaving a digital trace. We handled it. Quietly, efficiently, and under budget. That one changed everything. Suddenly, we weren't just the firm you called when things broke. We were the firm you called when you wanted to make sure they never did. We moved into a larger office. Upgraded systems. Brought in 2 analysts from former competitive firms who were sick of bureaucratic bloat. I hired a full-time operations director, Vanessa, who ran things like she'd been doing it in her sleep for years. She never asked dumb questions, never needed micromanaging, and never flinched when we had to work 48 hours straight. The energy was different, focused, no ego. Just execution. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Heather's firm was getting flasher. They opened a second office, launched a podcast, threw corporate influencer events with branded cocktail napkins. I watched a video of her once on stage talking about disruption through elegant strategy. She was wearing a pastel power suit and speaking like someone who just finished a TED Talk and immediately needed a nap. Mom sent me the clip. "So proud of your sister," she wrote. I typed out, "Same." Then deleted it and left it on red. It's not that I wanted recognition, I just wanted to not be invisible. Or at least not be invisible to the people who claimed they knew me best. But I knew how they worked. Heather didn't value success, she valued visibility. And since I didn't show mine off in magazines or press releases, I didn't count. That was fine. Because while she was busy climbing stages, I was negotiating a minority stake in a tech firm that powered the digital backbone of her largest client. She had no idea. Of course she didn't. She wasn't trained to look behind the curtain. And I wasn't interested in being on hers. There's something liberating about walking into a room knowing no one expects you to matter and then controlling the one thing they need without saying a word. That became my advantage. I stopped measuring my worth by who knew my title. I started measuring it by how many people relied on me without even knowing I was the reason things didn't fall apart. And every time Heather showed up in a headline with a cocktail in one hand and a quote about vision in the other, I smiled because while she was making noise, I was building silence into power. I was on a flight back from a cybersecurity roundtable in Seattle when Vanessa pinged me. FYI, Whitaker and Klein just sent over a formal inquiry about a cross-border compliance audit. Looks like they're vetting vendors for a multi-year restructure. I stared at the screen for a second, then laughed so loud the guy next to me jumped and spilled his ginger ale. Heather's company. The firm she bled for, bragged about, name-dropped like it was a VIP pass to the afterlife, was reaching out to Sentinel Atlas. Not knowing, of course, that Sentinel Atlas was mine. I didn't respond to the inquiry right away. We weren't desperate for new business. If anything, we were turning down more work than we could take, but something about the timing felt engineered. I did a little digging. Turns out Whitaker and Klein was bleeding clients after a failed international expansion. They'd over-leveraged, misjudged the regulatory complexity, and underestimated the scale of data compliance overseas. Their legal team had quietly settled 2 NDA violations, and their lead data officer had resigned 2 months prior. Publicly, they were fine. Internally, they were leaking water fast. Heather, of course, was still smiling in photos like nothing had happened. Still going to brunch panels. Still writing op-eds for Business Strategy Weekly. But the firm she'd hitched her wagon to was circling the drain. I had Vanessa run a standard intake screening, same as we do with any cold inquiry. We didn't flag the connection. We didn't pull any special reports. On the books, they were just another client fishing for a white knight. A week later, Vanessa got a follow-up. More urgent tone this time. We'd love to schedule a discovery call. Our executive team is available this Thursday. I looked at the attached names. There she was. Heather Whitaker, Director of Strategic Development. Listed right under the COO. The irony could have lit a cigar by itself. I told Vanessa, "Sure, book it, but don't list me on the call." "You want to ghost host your own meeting?" she asked. "I want to watch," I said. Let them pitch. The call was brutal in a slow-motion train wreck kind of way. Their COO danced around numbers. Their compliance lead couldn't answer a basic jurisdictional question. And Heather smiled too much. You can always tell when someone's losing ground by how much they lean on charisma. Her voice was bright. Her language was fluff. She used phrases like synergistic realignment and strategic optimization of trust architecture. Translation? They were scared and bluffing. After the call, our whole team agreed. The project was viable, but only if we took control of their back-end restructuring, terminated their current compliance tools, and rebuilt the foundation ourselves. We sent back a terms proposal. Not aggressive, just firm. 2 days later, they requested a meeting with the principal. I knew that was coming. Vanessa asked, "Want me to tell them now?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's make it interesting." We set the meeting for the following Tuesday, in person, at our headquarters in Charlotte. We offered to cover travel. They agreed. Heather didn't recognize the name Sentinel Atlas because I'd built it under my middle name and never once tied it to any public-facing personal brand. Not on social, not on LinkedIn, not in the press. The only people who knew were the people who worked with USAND. They weren't the type to gossip. She was walking into the lion's den with a marketing plan and a sinking ship, and I wasn't going to say a damn thing until the moment was perfect. Vanessa prepped the boardroom like we were hosting a diplomat. Everything was clean, tight, formal, no logos, no names on the agenda. Just a sleek black folder with the revised contract and a simple title: Executive Strategic Partnership Proposal. The morning of the meeting, I came in early. Wore a plain navy suit, no makeup, pulled my hair back the way I always did during field briefings. Nothing flashy, nothing fake. As I stood behind the mirrored glass of the conference hall, watching Heather's team walk through security, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel smug. I felt focused. They needed something they couldn't fake. And I was the last person they'd expect to have it. The second Heather stepped off the elevator, I knew she hadn't put it together. Her posture was too confident, too comfortable. She was used to being the most important person in the room, or at least pretending well enough that no one questioned it. Vanessa greeted her with the same cool, practiced tone we used with all high-profile clients. No extra warmth. No clues, just professional courtesy and quiet control. "This way, Miss Whitaker," Vanessa said, holding the door to the boardroom. Heather smiled, the kind of polished smile people rehearse in hotel mirrors. She was wearing a dove gray suit that probably cost more than my first deployment bonus. Her team followed closely, slightly nervous, whispering notes to each other. They carried leather portfolios and too many branded pens. I stayed behind the one-way glass, just watching, letting the silence do the work. My team was already seated inside, calm and composed. The contract packet sat in front of each chair, crisp and untouched. Heather scanned the room. You could tell she was trying to figure out who was in charge. Her eyes lingered on my director of strategy, older, confident. Then Vanessa. Then no one. Just an empty head seat at the table. "Will the principal be joining us shortly?" she asked. Vanessa nodded. Momentarily. I let them settle for a full 5 minutes. Just long enough for her to start thinking maybe she had the upper hand again. Then I walked in. No music. No introduction. Just the sound of my heels on the tile and the shift of chairs as people straightened up. Heather turned toward the noise, already prepping a polite expression. And then her face stopped. Not because she recognized me right away, but because for a split second, her brain couldn't make the image match any expectation. I didn't give her time to catch up. "Good morning," I said, placing my folder at the head of the table. "Let's get started." The room adjusted instantly. Everyone sat up straighter. My team stayed focused. Heather's team went silent. She blinked, once, then twice. You could see the flicker in her eyes, the quick mental rewind. I let her sit in that confusion for exactly 6 seconds. "You're the principal?" she asked, voice thinner than usual. "Yes," I said without looking at her, flipping open my copy of the contract. "I'm the founder and CEO of Sentinel Atlas." I didn't elaborate. I didn't smirk. I let the sentence hang in the air like a loaded gun with the safety off. Heather's COO tried to speak, but fumbled his words. Heather didn't move. Her fingers were tight around her pen, but her face tried to stay neutral. Too late, the shock had already landed. "I see," she said finally. "No," I said, looking her in the eye. "You don't." Then I started the meeting. I went through the revised proposal section by section, every clause, every condition, every reason they needed us more than we needed them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't twist the knife. I just stated facts. I explained how their expansion failed because their backend was built like a college group project. I pointed out the regulatory violations they narrowly avoided. I highlighted the missed updates in their compliance calendar and the breach they hadn't even discovered yet. I didn't insult, I didn't gloat. I just showed them what competent leadership looked like. Heather barely spoke. Her team kept stealing glances at her, unsure whether to look away or double down. By the end of the meeting, no one had touched the catered breakfast tray. I closed the folder. "This is a binding proposal," I said. "If accepted, Sentinel Atlas will restructure your systems over the next 18 months. We'll take operational lead on all digital infrastructure. Your internal team will be integrated or reassigned. Final say comes through us." The COO cleared his throat. "And if we decline?" I smiled politely. "Then you'll be in violation of 4 separate international compliance standards within 90 days, and I'd advise your legal team to start budgeting for damage control. Because the firm that replaces us won't be this generous." He nodded quickly. Heather still hadn't said a word. "I'll give you until end of week," I said, standing. "Vanessa will coordinate next steps." As I walked out, I looked at Heather one last time, and out with anger, not with revenge. Just clarity. All those years she spent trying to erase me, she never realized I wasn't trying to sit at her table. I was building my own. And now, hers was crumbling just to get a seat at mine. Back in my office, I didn't celebrate. No fist pump, no glass of whiskey. I sat down, opened my laptop, and resumed reviewing an unrelated contract for a defense logistics firm in Kansas. Because that's what mattered. Not Heather. Not the performance downstairs, just the work. But I didn't have to lift a finger for the fallout to begin. The first sign came 2 days later. A reporter from an industry blog reached out, one we'd worked with discreetly before. "Off the record," she said, "hearing Whitaker and Klein just got quietly restructured from the inside. Something about new executive oversight?" We hadn't leaked anything. We never do. But word always gets out when powerful people start scrambling. Heather's firm had always been louder than it was stable, and now the cracks were widening fast. Then the calls started. First from a mutual contact in New York. "Hey, not sure if you're aware, but Heather's fiancé just stepped down from the city development board. Internal probe. Something about misuse of campaign donations." I didn't say anything. I didn't ask questions. Then from Mom. "Heather's going through a rough patch. Just family stuff. She could use support." Support? The same woman who wouldn't even mention my name at holidays now needed backup because her carefully curated life was glitching? I let the voicemail sit for 3 days before deleting it. Then I got an email from Heather herself. Subject, call. That was it. No greeting. No apology. Just the desperate tone of someone realizing that silence can be louder than anger. I didn't respond. And still, it unraveled. A week after the contract was finalized, Vanessa walked into my office with her phone in hand. "You're going to want to see this." It was a LinkedIn update from Whitaker and Klein. They were proud to welcome a new strategic partner to oversee digital operations across all global accounts. No names were listed. But in the comments, speculation exploded. Was it a merger? A buyout? A bailout? No one could confirm. Heather didn't post anything. Radio silence from someone who used to post her lunch meetings like they were red carpet events. The only thing she did do was vanish. From panels, from press, from invites. One of her old interns posted a now-deleted story saying Heather wasn't taking calls and might be stepping away from client-facing roles for a while. Meanwhile, Sentinel Atlas was onboarding 2 of their former clients, both of whom said, quietly and without prompting, "We didn't like the way things were being run over there." Vanessa handled it all. I just kept moving. People assume revenge is loud, that it needs slamming doors and dramatic speeches and someone crying in the rain. But real revenge? It's quiet. It's organized. It's not about breaking someone down, it's about building something so strong they can't get around it. Heather had mocked my career path, ignored my work, dismissed my existence. She saw the uniform and thought it meant I'd settled for less. What she didn't understand was that structure, discipline, and clarity aren't weaknesses. They're weapons, especially when used strategically. She'd built her life around appearances. I'd built mine around resilience. And the minute her image cracked, there was nothing underneath to hold it up. No substance, no loyalty, just branding. So, when it all started falling apart, there wasn't anything she could anchor to. People stopped returning her emails. One of her longtime allies published a post about leadership transparency that, while not naming her directly, might as well have been a neon sign. The board at Whitaker and Klein announced a new interim executive lead, effective immediately. Heather's name was missing from the press release. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. 3 weeks after the restructuring at Heather's firm, my phone buzzed during a strategy call. It was Mom. Again. Vanessa glanced at the screen. "That's the 4th time this week." "5th," I said, silencing it. She left 2 voicemails and sent an email about a brunch catch-up. "I think she thinks this is just a phase." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Do they know yet?" "They're figuring it out. Slowly, painfully." I didn't block her. I wanted them to squirm a little. And they did. Heather's fall from grace wasn't a single explosion, it was a controlled demolition. Everything she had built on status, appearance, and curated connections was now paper-thin. She still had her condo and her monogrammed stationery, but the invites stopped coming. Her name stopped trending. Her circle started shrinking, and she was left with something she never learned to handle: irrelevance. It wasn't just professional, it was personal. Dad called too. He hadn't called me directly in years, always relayed messages through Mom. This time, his voice was low, almost raspy. "You know your sister's been having a rough time." I let him speak. We didn't know. About the business. About what you'd built. I guess we assumed. That I failed? I cut in. Or that I disappeared because I was embarrassed. Silence. "No," he said after a pause. "We just didn't ask." "Right," I said. "You assumed, and you never cared enough to check." "That's not fair." "It's accurate." I didn't yell. I didn't even sound angry. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from knowing you've spent a decade waiting for people to correct now that they finally do. It's too damn late. Then came the invitation. A thick envelope, cream cardstock, embossed return address, my parents' house. I opened it, and there it was, an invitation to Heather's small family gathering. No mention of what it was for. No reason given. Just a generic line: "We'd love to see you. We want to reconnect." It reeked of image control. Vanessa walked into my office as I was staring at the envelope. "I know that look," she said. "They think I'll come back because things are quiet now," I said. "They think you care about their approval." I smiled. "They still don't get it." "Are you going?" I paused. Then I nodded. "Oh, I'll go. But not for the reason they think." The day of the gathering, I pulled up in a dark gray electric SUV, not flashy, just clean, new, and silent. I wasn't trying to show off. I was just done pretending I didn't belong. I wore a simple black dress, tailored blazer, minimal jewelry. Nothing screamed money. But if you looked closely, the watch alone could have paid off their kitchen remodel. The house hadn't changed. Same porch. Same manicured bushes, same little brass nameplate next to the doorbell. Mom opened it. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe she always had been just louder. "Rachel," she said, forcing a smile. "You look well." I stepped past her without answering. Inside, the living room was filled with soft music and awkward small talk. Heather was perched on the armrest of a couch, drink in hand, trying to seem like the same confident woman from all her past photo ops. She saw me and froze for a beat too long. "Hey," she said, standing up. "Glad you could make it." "You invited me," I said flatly. "Yeah, well, I figured maybe it was time." "Time for what?" I asked, voice even. She blinked. "To move on. To, talk." Dad stepped in then, placing a hand on my shoulder like it still meant something. "We're proud of you, kiddo." "Now?" I asked. The room went quiet. "We didn't know," Mom said. "We didn't understand what you were doing." "You didn't ask," I replied. Heather exhaled sharply. "Look, maybe I wasn't the best sister. But I was just trying to do what made sense at the time." "For who?" I asked. "You, or for people who never gave a damn about anything but appearances?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. "I didn't come here for a scene," I said. "I came to make it clear that I'm not a secret anymore. You don't get to pretend I never existed when it's inconvenient, and then beg me to show up when your world starts falling apart." Mom reached for my hand. "Please, honey. Can't we start over?" I pulled back. "No," I said. "Because starting over would require acknowledging how badly you screwed up the first time." Heather stood frozen. Her eyes watered but didn't spill over. "I didn't come for your approval," I added. "I came because I want you to sit with the reality you ignored for 15 years. I built something without you. And it worked." Then I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. Calm. Unshaken. Unbothered. They could fumble through whatever came next. I'd already moved on. Later that evening, while the rest of the guests hovered in the living room making tired small talk, Heather followed me out onto the back deck. She stood there for a second, like she was waiting for the wind to give her permission to speak. I leaned on the railing, sipping water from a glass I didn't bother setting down. It was quiet except for the dull hum of the patio lights and the distant clinking of ice cubes from inside. Heather finally spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this way." I didn't turn around. "You mean you didn't expect to lose?" She flinched. I mean. I didn't realize how far apart we'd gotten." "That's because you never looked," I said, still staring at the fence line. "You only noticed when it started costing you." "I was proud of you," she offered weakly. Don't," I cut in. "Don't revise the past to make this easier for you. You weren't proud, you were dismissive. You left. You told people I was finding myself. You corrected them when they assumed I had a real job." Her voice dropped. "I was insecure." I turned then. "You were arrogant." She didn't argue. "I worked 12-hour shifts in a desert while you posted latte photos and tried to convince the world you were reinventing branding," I said. "And even when I built something from the ground up, something real, you still never asked about it. Not once. Not until your world started sinking." I messed up. "Yeah," I nodded. "You did." We stood in silence. She didn't cry, I didn't yell. It was just this long, aching stillness where both of us finally let the weight of the past land between us. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "Is there any way back?" I studied her face. She looked exhausted. Not just from the job or the fallout, but from carrying around the version of herself she thought everyone needed her to be. "No," I said quietly. "Not to what it was." Her shoulders sank. "But," I added, "that doesn't mean I hate you. It just means I don't owe you what you're asking for." "I'm not asking for anything." "You're asking for absolution without accountability. You want me to say we're fine so you can stop feeling guilty. But the truth is, we're not fine. And we won't be. Not until you stop thinking of me as your embarrassing sister and start recognizing me as someone who built a life without needing your permission." "Ida recognize you." "Too late." She swallowed hard. "So, that's it?" "No," I said. "That's the beginning of something different. Something honest. But I'm not going to make you feel better about what you did just because you're finally uncomfortable." She nodded slowly. "Fair. I'm not interested in revenge," I added. "That's not what this was about. I didn't dismantle your company. I didn't tank your engagement. I didn't write those headlines." "I know," she said. "All I did was build. You ignored it. Then it passed you." She looked at me like she wanted to say more, but for once in her life, she didn't push it. I turned back to the yard. The porch lights flickered softly across the fence posts. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog barked once, then quieted. "You can leave when you're ready," I said without turning around. "No one's going to stop you." She stood there a few seconds longer. Then I heard the soft creak of the deck boards as she walked back inside, footsteps slower than usual. And just like that, the apology was given. But not accepted. The following Monday, Sentinel Atlas officially closed its multi-phase integration of Whitaker and Klein. No press release. No announcement. Just a quiet update on our internal dashboard and a signed digital document that effectively gave us operational control of a company Heather once called too elite for startups. Vanessa knocked once and stepped inside. "Final signatures in. You want to confirm execution?" I looked up from my desk. "Did legal clear the revised transition clause?" 3 hours ago. I clicked the green button on my screen, and just like that, the last piece of Heather's professional pride became another branch on my company's tree. She hadn't been fired. Not exactly. But the reorg meant her title no longer carried weight. She kept an office, a desk, a paycheck, but no say in direction, no stake in vision. She was now what she'd once accused me of being, just a name on a contact list. Poetic? Maybe. But I didn't smile. I just moved on. We had bigger work ahead. Our expansion plan involved a 3-firm merger across 4 states, a shift in logistics software, and a pilot program with a Veterans Employment Initiative I'd pushed for years and was finally getting to launch. That was the win I actually cared about. But, as always, news found its way to my inbox. An anonymous email tip from someone in Heather's network landed midweek. She's telling people she stepped back voluntarily. Claims she's shifting her focus to consulting. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "You want me to flag that?" "Nope," I said. "Let her spin whatever version she needs. We're already on the next mission." Still, the irony clung to the air like the smell of burnt coffee. For years, I was the forgotten sister, the one who didn't fit the family mold, who refused to follow their version of success. They treated me like an afterthought. An inconvenience, a lesson in what not to become. But I had built more than they could ever comprehend. Not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because I refused to live boxed in by their small definition of worth. Heather had once told me years ago, at some long-forgotten family dinner, that I was more capable than I looked. It was meant as a compliment. She smiled when she said it, probably thinking she was generous for acknowledging it at all. Now she worked under the very structure I designed. Her daily reports passed through my management team. Her client proposals required our approval. Her email signature was tied to a domain I owned. Funny how that works. What I had wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, colder, permanent. It was ownership. I didn't post about it. I didn't send out feel-good statements. I let the results speak. And they did. Recruiters started reaching out to me for keynote spots Heather used to land. Panels. Mentorship summits. I declined most of them. But one caught my eye. A national leadership roundtable hosted by the U.S. Department of Labor. They'd seen my work with the Veteran Initiative and wanted me to speak on transition resilience. I said yes. It wasn't about being seen. It was about building something that outlived their ignorance. About creating systems where people like me, overlooked, underestimated, could finally operate without asking permission. That was the win. Not Heather's silence. Not my parents' confusion. Not the hollow apologies or awkward holiday invitations. The win was freedom. I walked into that government building 2 weeks later, wearing a simple charcoal suit and a black badge that read, "Keynote, R. McConnell, CEO, Sentinel Atlas." The other speakers nodded politely, curious. Most hadn't heard of me before. But by the end of my segment, several had pulled me aside. "That story hit. You made me rethink my entire hiring framework." "Where were you 10 years ago?" I shrugged. "Building." They laughed. But one woman, gray-haired, fierce eyes, an Army vet herself, didn't laugh. She just placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Took everything they said you didn't have, then turned it into something they couldn't touch." That one stayed with me. I got back to Charlotte that night, kicked off my shoes, poured a single scotch, and sat on the balcony watching the skyline. Down the street, lights blinked from our newest office tower. Across the city, data crunched through systems I'd funded, managed, and set in motion. None of it existed 15 years ago. All of it carried my name quietly, efficiently, proudly. Heather had once called me a nobody. And now? She forwarded me status updates. A month after the full integration, the only sign of Heather's presence at Sentinel Atlas was a forwarding line on our internal contact list marked inactive. Her office remained furnished but unoccupied. No goodbye email. No send-off cupcakes. Just silence, again. But this time, it wasn't mine. She resigned quietly, citing personal reasons, in a note to HR. Vanessa handed it to me without comment, just a raised brow and a tight smile. "She's out," she said. "I know," I replied. "She's been out since the day I walked into that boardroom." No celebration. No vindication speech. Just the end of a long, tired chapter that had been pretending to stay open. And yet, the emails kept coming. Not from Heather. From people who used to orbit her. Former clients. Ex-colleagues. The ones who never looked my way until it was suddenly inconvenient not to. "I had no idea that was your firm, congratulations. Wish we'd connected sooner. Would love to explore partnerships under your leadership." The same names who once RSVP'd to her rooftop mixers and called me the other sister were now falling over themselves to pivot. I didn't reply to most of them. I wasn't interested in alliances built on fear of missing out. But I did read every single message. Because I wanted to see at the exact moment they realized the pecking order had changed. Not because I wanted their praise. Because I remembered their silence. Still, the real kicker came when Mom called again. This time she didn't open with pleasantries. "She moved out," she said. "Heather, she's staying with your Aunt Carol for now." I didn't say anything. "She's not doing great." "I'm sure," I replied flatly. "She thought the work defined her," Mom said. "When it fell apart, so did everything else." "She thought the image defined her," I corrected. "The work never mattered." "Not really." "She said you embarrassed her," Mom blurted. "That you planned it from the beginning." Now I laughed in hard, sharp exhale. "Embarrassed her? By being competent?" "She said it wasn't fair. Neither was pretending I didn't exist." Mom sighed. "She doesn't know who she is anymore." "She never did." I almost hung up. But then I heard Mom whisper, barely audible, "I think I failed both of you." That gave me pause. "You didn't fail me," I said after a long silence. "You just ignored me." "That's not the same." "But it feels the same." "Then maybe you should sit with that." I didn't offer comfort. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. And she knew it. The holidays came early that year. Not the real ones, just the kind of meaningless corporate parties with catered finger food and a photographer paid to make every attendee look like a tech visionary. At Sentinel Atlas, we hosted ours at a veterans nonprofit we had just partnered with. We didn't rent a rooftop or fly in a DJ. We brought job recruiters, donated equipment, and trained a room full of people who actually needed the support. No one mentioned Heather. Not once. But I saw her name pop up on LinkedIn 2 days later, open to work. The profile picture was gone. The branding stripped. Just a name now, with no tagline. For someone who once built her empire on perception, the silence of it all must have felt like drowning. She didn't message me. She wouldn't. But she did try something else. A letter. Real envelope. Postmarked from Raleigh. Same handwriting as her high school graduation thank you cards. I opened it while waiting for a flight. Inside, one paragraph. "I didn't lose because of you. I lost because I forgot how to be real. You didn't take anything from me. You just stopped giving me space to pretend I was better. And without that illusion, I had nothing left. I'm sorry it took collapse for me to see it. No excuses. No requests. Just a quiet confession on paper." I folded it, placed it back in the envelope, and stuck it between 2 pages of the leadership book I'd brought on the trip. I didn't frame it. I didn't tear it up. It wasn't a victory. It was just a relic. Because in the end, she didn't lose to me. She lost to the version of herself that never grew. I arrived home from that business trip late on a Thursday night. The airport was half empty, the kind of quiet that only happens when no one's in a rush to be anywhere. I walked through my door, dropped my bag, fed my dog, and didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in my kitchen, letting the stillness settle. On the counter was a small package brown paper, no return label. Vanessa must have picked it up from the office. Inside, a simple leather card holder. Faded edges, familiar stitching. Tucked inside was a note. She always said you'd outshine them all. Looks like she was right. Aunt Carol. I sat down. That card holder had once belonged to my grandfather. Then my grandmother. And before she passed, she'd told Carol to give it to the one who fights quiet. I guess I'd become that person. And it hit me with fireworks or some cheesy triumphant music, but with this deep, steady calm. I had nothing left to prove. Not to Heather. Not to my parents. Not even to myself. Because I'd already done it. Every closed door they thought I'd never walk through. I owned the damn building now. Every backhanded comment, every family dinner I wasn't invited to, every glance that said you're not quite enough, none of it held weight anymore. Because I didn't just get a seat at the table. I designed the table. I chose who got to sit at it. And I made sure no one ever felt as invisible as I once did. Sentinel Atlas continued to grow. We launched new programs supporting women veterans in tech. We opened offices in 3 more states. Our military consulting division became a case study at Harvard Business School. But the success didn't feel like a spotlight anymore. It felt like infrastructure. Stable. Quiet. Mine. And family? I still called Aunt Carol on Sundays. Still sent Margaret photos of the rescue dogs I sponsored. Still responded to my dad's occasional attempts at civility with professional distance. But I didn't go back to the house. Not for holidays. Not for birthdays. Not even when Heather finally emailed a picture of her new baby, captioned, "Her name's Grace. I hope she grows up strong." Like you. I replied with 2 words. Thank you. No bitterness. No sarcasm. Just acknowledgement. I hoped Grace did grow up strong. I hoped she grew up never needing to shrink herself to be loved, never learning to tie her value to someone else's approval, never being told her ambition was too much. Because that's what it had all come down to, really. They were afraid of a woman who didn't need them. And they should have been. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a leadership summit in DC. The organizers didn't care about my last name. They didn't care who my sister was or what neighborhood I grew up in. They cared about the systems I'd built, the people I'd helped, the quiet fire I refused to put out. I ended the speech the same way I'll end this story. If you've ever been the one they doubted, if you've ever sat at a dinner table full of people who couldn't see past your resume, your job title, your salary, or your silence, if you've ever been called too much, not enough, or not our kind, let me tell you something real. You don't need their seat. Build your own. And when they finally show up, looking for a way in, let them stand. Because the view from your own table, it's better than anything they ever offered you. Some stories aren't about revenge. They're about reclamation of space, of dignity, of voice. This wasn't about humiliating anyone. It was about ending the quiet dismissal that so many of us endure for years from the people who should have been in our corner. If you've ever been overlooked, written off, or underestimated by your own family, know this. You're not alone. These family revenge stories? They hit because they're never really about spite. They're about survival. And eventually about freedom. I didn't set out to get even. I set out to become whole. Everything else was just a consequence. If you felt seen in this story, or it reminded you of your own family drama, or maybe even sparked something inside you to finally build your own table, leave a comment. Share your moment, or just say, I see you. And if you want more real, raw, powerful revenge stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. You belong here.